Masechet Menaḥot, Daf Non Tet, Nu Mishnah, Yesh Te'unot Shemen Ulvona, Shemen Velo Lebona, Lebona Velo Shemen, Lo Lebona Velo Shemen. Among all the different kinds of Korban Mincha offerings, some of them require both oil and frankincense, some oil but not frankincense, some just frankincense but not oil, and some have just flour and not frankincense nor oil. And now we will list each type. Velu Te'unot Shemen Ulvona. Most of them require both oil and frankincense, and that includes Minchat Hasolet, fine flour meal offerings. So this is actually the first one that is mentioned in the Pesukim in chapter 2 of Vayikra. We're going to come back to this Pasuk again and again, so let's remember it. V'nefesh ki takrib korban mincha ladonai solet yeh korbano v'yasak aleha shemen v'natan aleha levona. This is the most plain, just flour, not cooked in any special way. And so if someone wants to bring just fine flour, mincha laHashem, then he brings solet, fine flour, and oil, and lebona. And he brings it v'kamatz, and so on. And so this is brought in its raw state, not cooked. And then after that, it brings the other categories, ma'afer tanur, and within ma'afer tanur, there are two types, either halot or rikikim. Remember that, it's going to be important in a second. And then there's the machabat, and then there's the marcheshet, and so on. Okay, so the first type that requires both is minchat solet, and then also machabat and marcheshet. Those are the two fried ones, either in a pan or like a pan fried, or a deep pan, meaning deep fried. And then there's halot and rikikin. Those are two subtypes of oven baked. They can be oven baked as loaves or as wafers. Minchat kohanim, if a kohen brings a korban mincha on his own, a voluntary individual korban mincha, the only difference is that it gets entirely burnt. But otherwise, it requires both oil and frankincense. Minchat kohen mashiach, the daily korban mincha that the kohen gadol has to bring, half in the morning and half in the afternoon, has both. And minchat goy, minchat nashim, minchat ha'omer. A non-Jew is allowed to offer a korban mincha. Women for this are the same as men if they want to bring a korban mincha. And the omer that's brought on the second day of Pesach, all these require both oil and frankincense. Next, minchat nesachim tuna shemen ve'en teuna lebona. Minchat nechasim is referring to korban mincha that comes as an accompaniment to olah and shelamim. They require oil, but not frankincense. Lechem hapanim ta'un lebona ve'en ta'un shemen. The showbread that are brought for week to week and put on the shulchan, and they stay on the shulchan all week, and then they're eaten by the kohanim on Shabbat. They require lebona, but not oil. In fact, the lebona is offered as burnt, and that is a matir. Once you burn the lebona, then the kohanim can eat the 12 loaves. Sheteh halechem minchat choteh minchat kenaot en teonin lo shemen velo lebona. The two loaves that are brought on Shavuot, they're brought together with the two kevasim that accompany them, and also the korban mincha of a sinner, olev yored, and he's poor. Then he brings just plain flour and also a sotah. She brings a korban mincha, but it's plain flour and not oil and not levona. And that's the last two are because of a sin or because of suspected sin, so we don't make them fancy, and therefore they are brought plain. That's the end of the Mishnah. Gemara, Amar Papa, Kol hechaditnan aser tenan. Papa says, anytime you have a list of korban mincha offerings, then it's going to be 10 loaves, 10 items that you're bringing. You're bringing an isaron of flour, and with that isaron of flour, you make 10 cakes, 10 pancakes, 10 loaves for each. Lapuke midrbi Shimon damar mechesa halot mechesa rikikin yavi kamashmalan dela. What's the significance of the Papa's statement? It's coming to exclude the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says if someone says I'm going to donate an oven baked offering, then he can bring half chalot and half rikikin. He can bring 5 and 5. But Papa is saying not so for Tanakama. According to Tanakama, any of these that are listed over here have to be brought 10 of that same type. So if you're doing an oven type, then it has to be either 10 halot or 10 rikikin. You can't mix and match some and some. ten tenorabanan. Okay, now the rest of this amud is going to cite a long baraita and then analyze each section of the baraita. It teaches, V'natata aleha shemen, ve'lo al lechem hapanim shemen. Now we're citing a pasuk in the middle of towards the end of this perek, that is talking about Menaḥot bikurim. That's Menaḥot ha'omer. That's brought on the second day of Pesach. Once you bring that, you bring it from the new grain, the new barley. And once that is brought, then everybody can eat from the new grain. And in the mikdash, you can use the new barley and until Shavuot. In Shavuot, you bring the shtei halechem, and that allows using the new wheat in the mikdash. So this says, Vim takri Menaḥot bikurim ladonai aviv kalui ba'esh Geres, Karmel, Takrib et Menaḥot bikorecha. When you bring the first fruit, meaning it's talking about the first grain, the first barley, there should be the first fruit ears of corn. Corn doesn't here mean American corn, it means grain. Dried by fire, the grain beaten out of fresh ears. And here's the key. We're going to be analyzing this pasuk a lot. V'natata aleha shemen, v'samta aleha lebona, mincha hi. On this we place shemen. The baraita is going to say, oh, for this you need shemen, but the word aleha is coming to exclude something, and that there's something else that does not require oil. And then it says, v'samta aleha lebona, the korban ha'omer, make sure to put lebona, but that's making an inference that there is some other type that does not require lebona. We're going to learn something from the word mincha, and also we're going to learn something from. Okay, then it continues. So let's see what the baraita says. So you have to put for the korban ha'omer, it needs oil, but not lechem hapanim that's brought on every week. The showbread, there's no oil there. Now, she'echol haveh dinhu. Why do we need this if it doesn't say anything about oil? Regarding lechem hapanim, why would we think that we would need oil there, that you need a pasuk to tell me not so? Because I might have learned otherwise from a kal vachomer that you do need oil. Uma minchat nesachim she'ena teuna lebona ta'una shemen, the mincha that accompanies animals, where those do not require lebona, and yet they do require oil, then keeping that in mind, lechem hapanim she'ta'un lebona and odin she'ta'un shemen, then the lechem hapanim, which requires lebona, so it's more significant than minchat nesachim, so I might argue that all the more so, they require oil. That's what I would have assumed without any pasuk. Talmud lomad aleha shemen velo alechem hapanim shemen. Therefore, in the context of korban ha'omer, it says you put oil for korban ha'omer and not lechem hapanim. Okay, that's derivation number one. Next, v'samta aleha lebona velo aminchat nesachim lebona. This teaches me that we need lebona for the korban ha'omer, only for it, and not, that comes to exclude, minchat nesachim, that's brought with an animal, does not require lebona. We just had mentioned that here. But now this is teaching us that we derive it from this pasuk. Now, why would you even think that you would need levona if it doesn't say so? Well, a kal vachomer, the other way around. She'echol v'halodinhu. Uma lechem hapanim she'eno ta'un shemen ta'un lebona, minchat nesachim she'teuna shemen, and odin she'teuna lebona. I might argue that lechem hapanim does not require oil, but does require lebona. If so, minchat nesachim, which requires oil, so therefore that's chamur. All the more so, it would require lebona. That's what I might have derived if I didn't have this pasuk. That's why Talmud lomad aleha lebona velo aminchat nesachim lebona. That's why in the context of korban ha'omer it says the korban ha'omer needs lebona, but not something else, and that something else is excluding minchat nesachim. Okay, that's the second derivation. Mincha lerabot minchat shemini lelebona, and the word mincha comes to include the korban mincha that was offered on the 8th day of the consecration of the Mishkan. It says regarding that, it's a one-time only deal, but still we would have to know what it was, and Moshe would have to know what it was, so how did he derive it? And so the pasuk there, it does say that korban mincha you have oil, but it doesn't say anything about lebona, and so the word mincha in this pasuk regarding korban ha'omer is coming to tell you that, there's another mincha that also requires lebona, and that's the one on the 8th day of consecration. he leosi shete halechem shelo yita'anu lo shemen velo lebona. The word he is also a limiting word. It's saying he, this korban ha'omed requires these things, but that comes to exclude shte halechem that are brought on Shavuot, and those require not oil and not lebona either. That's the end of the baraita. Let's analyze each part. Amar mor aleha shemen velo lechem panim shemen. The korban ha'omed requires oil, and that comes to the word aleha comes to exclude lechem hapanim that are brought from week to week. No oil for that. Ema aleha shemen velo minchat kohanim shemen. Now this seems kind of arbitrary. How do you know that the word aleha, except the word aleha is an exclusionary word? How do you know it's coming to exclude lechem hapanim, that does not require oil? Maybe it's teaching me that minchat kohanim. If a kohen brings a korban mincha, an individual voluntary korban mincha, that's the one that does not require oil. Why'd you decide to exclude the lechem hapanim and not exclude minchat kohanim? And so now we're going to compare which they have in common. Mistabera minchat kohanim hava lerabuye. It would make more sense to include minchat kohanim, that it does require oil because it has a lot of similarities to korban ha'omed. And now we're going to list all the ways in which korban omed is similar to minchat kohanim, and all these things are not true for lechem hapanim. So number one, sheken isaron requires the korban ha'omed is in isaron. Minchat kohanim also is in isaron. Lechem hapanim is more than that, so it's a different amount. Kili, both omed and minchat kohanim have to be mixed, kneaded in a temple vessel, whereas lechem hapanim are just baked in the oven. They don't have to be kneaded in a temple vessel. Chutz, both the korban ha'omed and minchat kohanim are prepared outside of the courtyard, and then they're brought in later, whereas lechem hapanim are prepared inside the temple courtyard. Ve'sura, both omed and minchat kohanim, if you leave it overnight, it becomes notar. Not true for lechem hapanim. We of course leave it over for 7 nights from week to week, and so it doesn't have a problem of notar, of changing shape. Hagasha, both korban ha'omed and minchat kohanim are brought to the southwest corner of the mizbeach. You have to be brought there, whereas lechem hapanim are not brought there. They're just placed onto the shulchan. Ve'ishim, both the omed and minchat kohanim are entirely or partially burnt. The omed, part of it, the kometz is burnt, and minchat kohanim is entirely burnt. But lechem hapanim, none of it is burnt. It's all eaten by the kohanim. So there you go. That makes sense. Therefore, that omed requires oil. So too, minchat kohanim requires oil because it's very similar. But now we say, maybe not. Adrabah, lechem hapanim hava lerabuye. And now we're going to list similarities between omed and lechem hapanim, and all these similarities that are not true for minchat kohanim. So number one, sheken sibura, or korban ha'omed and lechem hapanim are communal offerings. Minchat kohanim are individual offerings. Choba, omed and lechem hapanim are required, whereas minchat kohanim are not obligatory, voluntary. Tamya, if they have to be brought when tameh, so it's actually because they're communal offerings, they can be brought even betum'ah. That applies to omed and lechem hapanim, but an individual, minchat kohanim, cannot be brought when tameh. De achil, that they are eaten. The omed, most of it's eaten. Lechem hapanim is entirely eaten. Minchat kohanim is burnt, not eaten. Pigula, okay, omed and lechem hapanim can become pigul, and that's because there is something that is a matir for them. The omed, you have to take the kometz. You can't eat the rest of the omed until you take the kometz. So if the kohen takes the kometz and does it having in mind to consume the rest outside the time, becomes pigul. Lechem hapanim, also you have the frankincense that you burn first. If you have wrong intention about the frankincense regarding time, then the lechem hapanim become pigul. Not true for minchat kohanim. There is no matir for them because they're not allowed to be in at all, so they can never become pigul. And b'shabbata, omed and lechem hapanim are brought on Shabbat. Lechem hapanim is always brought on Shabbat, and omed, if the second day of Pesach happens to be Shabbat, then you'd bring that on Shabbat. But an individual voluntary offering like minchat kohanim is not brought on Shabbat. So therefore, we actually see that the omed and lechem hapanim have a lot of things in common also. also. So why not compare those and say, yes, you need oil for both of those, and exclude minchat kohanim, mistabera nefesh. And the conclusion is that since there are ways in which the omed is similar to lechem panim, but there's also many ways it's similar to minchat kohanim. So if we just compare the ways that they're similar, it's a toss-up. Instead, we're going to look at the word nefesh. Let's look back. This was from the first pasuk that we quoted, chapter 2, verse 1. V'nefesh ki takriv korban mincha l'Adonai. So this was saying, it's talking about an individual korban. It was in the context of the solet, the plain mincha offering, but it's teaching that this is an individual korban and requires both shemen and lebona. Because that individual korban requires both, so it makes more sense to say that between lechem panim, which is a communal offering, and minchat kohanim, which is an individual offering, it should be the minchat kohanim, because it's an individual offering, should require oil. Because we're going to compare it to this, the minchat solet, which is where it says nefesh, so to an individual kohen should be the same and require oil. So the comparisons were a toss-up. Instead, we're going to say minchat kohanim, it's got to require oil, because that's just another type of individual korban, like a solet that anybody else brings, a kohen brings it, it was going to require oil. Since the word in the aleha regarding is not excluding minchat kohanim, because that does have oil. Therefore, we conclude that it is excluding lechem hapanim. Lechem hapanim does not require oil. That was the first derivation of the baraita. Now let's analyze the next one. Amar mor, aleha lebona velo minchat nesachim lebona. The korban ha'omed requires frankincense, and aleha comes to exclude minchat nesachim that come along with an animal that does not require frankincense. We ask, how do you know it's coming to exclude minchat nesachim? Maybe it's coming to exclude minchat kohanim. Now, so we're going to go through another exercise now and compare the similarities of each. No, it makes more sense that the omer and minchat kohanim are very similar in the following ways, and therefore, just like omer requires lebona, minchat kohanim should also require levona. So here's all the ways in which omer and minchat kohanim are similar and do not have these things in common with minchat nesachim. Sheken isaron, minchat haomer and minchat kohanim require just one isaron, but the korban mincha that comes along with the animal requires more esronim depending on what kind of animal it is. Balul belog, both omer and minchat kohanim, you just bring one log of oil, whereas the libations that come together with an animal sometimes require more than one log. Mugash, korban ha'omer and minchat kohanim are brought close to the altar, to the southwest corner, but minchat nesachim, you do not have to bring close to the corner. Biglal atzem, omer and minchat kohanim are brought in and of themselves. That's it. They don't not accompanied with anything else. Whereas minchat nesachim are only come because they're an accompaniment to the animal. So that's a lot of ways in which those are the same, and that's why we should compare them and say omer requires frankincense, and so also minchat kohanim is very similar, should require frankincense, and therefore we should exclude minchat nesachim. But then we argue against that. Adrabah, minchat nesachim hava leraboyeh. Look, we should include minchat nesachim. That's the one that requires frankincense, like omer, because look at all these things that they have in common that are not true for minchat kohanim. Sheken sibura, omer and minchat nesachim are communal offerings, not like minchat kohanim, which are individual. Hova, they are obligatory, unlike minchat kohanim, which is voluntary. Itameh, precisely because they are communal obligatory offerings, the omer and minchat nesachim can be brought even when tameh. Minchat kohanim cannot be brought when tameh. Also b'shabbatah, minchat omer and minchat nesachim can be brought on Shabbat, whereas minchat kohanim, individual, a voluntary offering, is not brought on Shabbat. So now this is a toss-up again. Conceptually, there are similarities to this one and to that one. So we answer the same way. Mistabera nefesh. It makes sense that because regarding the solet mincha offering, where it says you need both oil and frankincense, minchat kohanim is also an individual korban mincha, and so it should fit in within the category of other individual Korban Mincha offerings, standard ones that require frankincense, so therefore it makes more sense to say that Minchat Kohanim requires frankincense, and that leaves the word Aleha and Omer to exclude Minchat Nesachim. Let's analyze the next part of the Braita. Mincha l'rabot Minchat Shemini l'ilbona. The word Mincha comes to tell us that the mincha on the 8th day of consecration required lebona. It says there that it requires oil, but now we are learning that it requires lebona also. Ve'ema lehosi. How you know the word mincha is coming to include? Maybe it's coming to exclude and tell me that you should not bring lebona for that 8th day mincha offering. Haimai iamat bishlam al rabot shapir. But now we ask, why would we think to exclude it? If you say it's coming to include it, fine, that makes sense because I wouldn't know it otherwise. Ela iamat lehosi. But if you say, tell me it's coming to exclude and teach me not to bring frankincense, why would I need a special pasuk to tell me not to bring something? I wouldn't think to bring it in the first place. If I had no derivation, I would assume I wouldn't bring it. Why? Because we're not going to learn the laws of a one-time only korban from a korban that applies in future generations. So yes, in future generations, many of the korbanot, most of them, have frankincense, but the korban mincha of the 8th day was a one-time only thing. So we're not going to compare it to anything else, and therefore the pasuk says, bring it with oil, doesn't say frankincense. So if I had no other pasuk, I would assume that the standard would be no frankincense. So that's why if I have a pasuk, mincha, coming to teach me something about minchat shemini, it must be coming to tell me that I have to bring frankincense. Next, the Braita says, lo si sheteh halechem shelo yita'anu lo shemen velo lebona. The word he comes to exclude sheteh halechem, that requires nothing, not oil and not lebona. We ask, ve'ema lo si minchat kohanim. Again, how do you know it's coming to exclude sheteh halechem from both these things? Maybe the word he is coming to tell me that minchat kohanim gets nothing. Mistabara minchat kohanim hava l'rabuye sheken isaron kili masa ve'asim hagasha ve'ishim. So now again we're going to compare them. So the following things are similar between korban ha'omer and minchat kohanim. Since they're so similar, like korban ha'omer requires both oil and frankincense, so to minchat kohanim should require both. We're not going to exclude them. So what do they both have in common? That's not true for shteh halechem. Well, isaron, omer and minchat kohanim are just one isaron. Shteh halechem is more. Keli, they both have to be kneaded and prepared in a temple vessel. Not true shteh halechem. Masa, omer and minchat kohanim have to be brought masa, where shteh halechem become hametz. Ve'etzem, omer and minchat kohanim are brought by themselves. Shteh halechem are brought together with two kevasim. Hagasha, omer and minchat kohanim are brought to the southwest corner of the mizbeach. Sheteh halechem are not. Ve'ishim, omer, part of the omer, the kometz is burnt. Minchat kohanim is entirely burnt. Shteh halechem, none of it is burnt. So you see, those are very similar. But we argue opposite. Adraba, shteh halechem havalel rabuye sheken sibur chovat tamyad de'achal pigola b'shabetam matir tenufa ba'aretz. You can argue that shteh halechem and korban ha'omer, that they should be the same, and shteh halechem should require both and exclude minchat kohanim, because omer and shteh halechem have the following things in common that are not true for minchat kohanim. Both omer and shteh halechem are communal offerings. They're obligatory, and because there are communal offerings and obligatory, they can be brought even when tameh. It says all those are not true for minchat kohanim. Omer and shteh halechem are, omer, part of it is, most of it is eaten. Shteh halechem is entirely eaten. Minchat kohanim, nobody eats it. Pigul, the omer and shteh halechem, there is something that is a matir for them. The omer, you need the kometz. So if you have wrong intention during the kometz, or shteh halechem, if you have wrong intention when you're bringing the animals, then omer and shteh halechem can become pigul. Minchat kohanim, there is no matir for it, so it does not become pigul. Omer and shteh halechem, because they're communal offerings, they're brought even on Shabbat. Not true minchat kohanim. Omer and shteh halechem both are matir for something else. Once you bring the omer on Pesach, then that is matir all the hadash for everybody else, and shteh halechem on Shavuot is matir the new wheat in the Bet HaMikdash. Tenufa, both omer and shteh halechem are waived. Minchat kohanim is not waived, and both omer and shteh halechem have to be brought from grain in Israel, which is not true of minchat kohanim. And also, more things that have in common. Bizman, Omer and Shtei Alechem have to be brought on specific holidays. Minchat Kohanim is not. Hadash, they have to be both brought from either the new barley, and the Shtei Alechem is the new wheat. Minchat Kohanim, not from new wheat. Vehane Nefishin. And now look, the Omer and Shtei Alechem have more things in common than Omer and Minchat Kohanim. So therefore, why don't we say that Shtei Alechem is like Omer and requires oil and frankincense, and exclude Minchat Kohanim with the word he? And again, we end with the same derivation, Mistaberat Nefesh, because it says Nefesh regarding the Solet, and that's an individual offering. Minchat Kohanim is an individual offering. It makes the most sense that just like anyone who brings an individual offering, a regular offering, brings oil and frankincense, the Kohen also who brings an individual voluntary mincha will have to bring oil and frankincense. That is the most important. And all these other similarities, these are more similar, that's more similar, are not going to be as important as the word nefesh, which will come to include this and minchat and minchat Kohanim. Next Mishnah, v'chayav al hashemen bifnei asmo v'chayav al lebona bifnei atzma. Natan al hashemen pesala lebona yelaketenna. This Mishnah is picking up on the last category in the previous Mishnah of those korban menachot that have no oil and no frankincense. Two of the three were the minchat choteh, someone who sins has to bring on olev yored. Let's look at that pasuk. It says, "Vimlo tasig yadol lishtei torim o lishnei bnei yonah." Someone has to bring an olev yored, but he cannot afford not animals and not even birds. Ve'bi et korbano asher chata asirit ha'efa solet lechatat. So his korban, his korban chatat will be a asirit of a ephah of flour. Lo yasim aleha shemen velo yiten aleha lebona ki chatati. This is a key pasuk that we're going to analyze right now. That one is prohibited from putting oil. It's not like, okay, doesn't need oil, but if you want, you could put. No, it's prohibited to put oil. It's prohibited to put lebona because it's a korban hatat. So it should be something that's demeaning. The same is true for a sotah, minchat sotah, which is supposed to be demeaning. And now, so that this Mishnah teaches us that one is liable, prohibited and liable if he puts oil on it by itself, and also the frankincense by itself. And then if he puts both, then he is open to two liabilities. And furthermore, if he puts oil on it, it becomes pasul. Not only is he liable, he violates the alav and he gets lashes, also he ruins the korban. Levona, however, although he violates and he gets lashes, but he could just remove it. So because levona is easy, it's a chunk, it's a piece, a sliver of levona. Okay, so you just take it off. Oil, when you pour oil onto the flour, it gets mixed in there. It's impossible to remove it, so it's invalid. But levona, you can remove it, and therefore it's still valid as long as you remove it. Natan shemen al shiareha eno over belo taseh. Now this law above applies only when you add oil to the original, the entire korban mincha. However, once you take a kometz, then if you put oil on the leftover, there's no law ta'aseh. The law ta'aseh is only putting oil on the korban before the kometz. Natan kli al gabe kli lo pesala. If someone puts oil in a vessel and puts that vessel into the vessel where the flour is, he does not violate because it's not touching that oil. Just take out that top vessel. So just putting it in a vessel inside is not a violation. It's only a violation if you pour the oil into the flour itself. Baraita teaches Tenurabanan, Lo yasim aleha shemen v'imsam pasal. One is not permitted to put oil, so it's a violation. And if you do put it, then it disqualifies the korban. You might think that that's the same is true for lebona, that there's a prohibition. And if you put lebona, it's pasul. Tamodomar ki hatat. Therefore, the pasuk says here ki hatat. In other words, it's still called a hatat. Lo yiten lebona ki hatat. In other words, don't put it in, but if you do put it in, it's still a valid korban hatat. You might think that's true for oil also. that there's a prohibition, but if you did it, it's still valid? No, it says he, which is a limiting word to say that's only true for lebona, but not for shemen. Now the Baraita asks itself, why are you making this distinction and saying that if you put oil, it's invalid, but if you put lebona, it's still valid? And the answer is, posel ani beshemen she'efshar lelaketo, machshir ani belebona she'efshar lelokta. I'm going to invalidate the korban if you put oil, because it's impossible to remove the oil once it's mixed into the flour. But the levona is okay because I can just remove it. It's a sliver there. It's easy. Just take it out, and then it's okay. Be'a Rabba bar Rav Huna Rabbi Yochanan natan aleha levona shechuka mahu. Rabba bar Rav Huna es Rabbi Yochanan. What if he grinds up the frankincense into fine particles and spreads it on top of the flour? What about that case? Mishum de efshar lakata v'ha lo efshar lakata. When we said previously that it does not invalidate, the frankincense does not invalidate, but oil does, is it because you can remove the frankincense? But in this case, when you grind it up, it has the same status as the oil. It's impossible to take out every particle of frankincense, so it would have the same law. Or is the reason why frankincense does not invalidate is because it doesn't get absorbed. Unlike oil gets absorbed into the flour. The frankincense, even though it's just mixed up, but even though it's mixed up in there, but it's just the particles next to each other, it's not absorbed. And maybe there, and according to that, even if I grind it up and sprinkle it around, still it will not be invalid. Here, whether it's a whole frankincense or ground up, it's not being absorbed. That's his question. Let's try to answer it. Tashema ulbona ilaketena. In the Mishnah it says, if you put lebona in it, you must remove it. So doesn't that mean that, in fact, you have to remove it? The only reason why it's okay is because you can remove it. But if you grind it up and you can't remove it, then in fact it would be disqualified. So can we derive it from the Mishnah? We say no, not necessarily. Maybe it's only saying 1 point, but actually there is 2 points. So and both are valid. Number one, it's valid because it's not absorbed. Second of all, you can take it out. Now, if you have one without the other, it will still be valid. In other words, even if it's ground up and you can take it out, still it's not absorbed. And so there's no proof from here, although it's true. Yes, if you can take it out, you should. But even if you can take it out, could be that it will still be valid because it's not absorbed. So we can't prove it from there. Let's try proving it from the language of the Baraita. Tashema machshir ani bilbona she'efshar lelokta hachanameh chada ve'od ka'amar. The Baraita says that if you put frankincense in it, even though you violated prohibition, it's still a valid korban because you can take it out. So if you just stop there, it sounds like the only reason why it's okay is because you could take it out. But if you ground it up and you can't take it out, then it's no good. So is that a good proof? But we say not necessarily. Maybe it's only saying 1 point, and then it says one reason, and then it adds another. Number one, machshir ani belebona. It's okay because it's not absorbed inside. And second reason why it's okay is because you could take it out. But even if you couldn't take it out, it's still okay because it's not absorbed. And therefore here also, there's no proof. Mai have Allah. Okay, so what's going to be the bottom line? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Tanya. Menaḥot chotem menaḥot kenaot shenatan aleha lebona melaket et halebona ukshera. Another braita that teaches that for menaḥot chotem menaḥot kenaot, that's for sotah. If you put lebona in it, then you take out the lebona and it's kosher. V'imad shelo liket lebonata chisheb aleha ben chutz zmano ben chutz koma pasul ve'en bo karet. However, if you put the lebona in and you didn't yet take it out, and you have in mind that you are going to consume this korban outside the time or outside the place. In either of those cases, it's pasul, although there's no karet. Now, why is there no karet? Isn't that called pigul? Well, remember, pigul is only if there's no other problem with it. Here, it has lebona in it. Since while the lebona is in it, it's pasul. During the time that it's in it, it's not going to be good. Since it has another pasul, therefore the intention for outside the time, although it makes it disqualified, there will not be karet. ואם משליקט לבונתה מחשב עליה חוץ ממקומו פסול ואין בו כרת חוץ מזמנו פיגול וחייבים עליו כרת. However, let's say you put lebona in and then you took it out. and after he took it out, he has in mind to consume it outside the place. It's pasul, but there's no karet, because outside the place is never karet for that. That's not pigul. Chutz lizmano, if he has in mind to consume it past the time, then it's pigul, and one is liable to karet. What can we prove from here? That it only becomes valid if you can actually take it out. While it's in there, even though it's not absorbed, it's just sitting there, is pasul while it's in there. And so you can't say, well, it's not absorbed, that's why it's not pasul. Yeah, it's there and it's not absorbed, and yet in this one, in the first case of this baraita, it nevertheless is pasul, and that's why there's no karet. Only once you actually take it out. By actually taking it out, then you remove it. So we see, according to this, that the key factor is the ability to take it out. Well, it's in there no matter what, whether it's ground up or whole, it's pasul, but it's only when you actually take it out, then it becomes okay. And what if you didn't take it out? It's no good. Therefore, if it's ground up and it's all over the place, it's pasul. That's what we see over here. As long as it's inside, no matter what, it's no good. So the fact that you cannot remove it means it's going to be pasul forever. It doesn't matter if it's absorbed or not, because in this case, in the first one, the resha, it's not absorbed, it's actually whole, and yet it's pasul just being in there. So just being next to it, just being in the bowl, already makes it pasul, whether it's ground up or not. And if it's ground up, then it's impossible to ever get it out. So therefore, if it's ground up, even though it's not absorbed, it will become permanently pasul because it's impossible to take it out. The Gemara now asks a question about that baraita. V'teheveh pach V'amai pasla b'machshava tachuihu. The Braita said that if one puts frankincense onto the Menaḥot hoteh, and at that point, before he takes it off, has in mind that he's going to consume it outside the time or outside the place, then it becomes pasul, and it's permanently pasul even after he takes off the frankincense. Why should that be? Compare it to, or imagine that it was a cruse of oil, and you poured oil onto the korban hoteh. That makes it pasul, and that by itself makes it pasul. Now, if after I poured oil on it, I would have in mind to consume it after outside the time or outside the place, that intention is meaningless because it's already invalid. That's it. It's already invalid. So the intention to now do something for something already invalid, that intention does not change anything because it's already rejected. And therefore, we should argue the same thing here. Once I put frankincense into the Menaḥot hoteh, it is now invalid. The fact that I have intention should not count for anything. That's like I had intention about a desk in the other room. It makes no difference because it's already invalid. And therefore, it should not be permanently rejected. If I take off the frankincense, then it should be good again. In other words, while the frankincense is on there, because that's invalid, the wrong intention should not count for anything. And therefore, it should not be permanently rejected. Once I remove the frankincense, now it should be okay. That's the question. We have three answers to this. Amar Abaye, hatat karyara chamana. Abaye says no. The pasuk, remember, still calls it a hatat, even though you put frankincense on it, and it's a prohibition. Nevertheless, it's called a hatat, so it's valid in some sense, enough that if I have wrong intention while the frankincense is on it, it's still that also will add to the invalidity, and that wrong intention will make it invalid permanently, even after I remove the frankincense. Answer number 2. Rava Amar Hamaneh Hanan Misrihu Delet Le Tihoyin. According to Rava, the author of this baraita is Hanan, the Egyptian, Talmudic sage, a Tana, and he does not follow the opinion that things are permanently rejected. If something is rejected, it's only temporarily rejected, and therefore, since it's only temporarily rejected, so now when you remove the frankincense, that frankincense only made it temporarily rejected, not permanently, and so the wrong intention does apply even there. Tetanya. Where do we see that? The Hanan Misri does not follow the opinion that once something is rejected, is permanently rejected, because he says, Hanan Misri Omer, afilu dam bakos mevi habero shelo b'hagrala umzaveg lo. On Yom Kippur, you have to bring 2 seirim, and you do a lottery. One of them will be la Azazel. One of them is la Hashem. One is la Hashem. You do shechita and you take the blood. and the blood is going to be sprinkled in the Kodesh. Now, they have to both be in existence for each one to be valid. They're paired with each other. What if, while you have the blood in the cup, you didn't sprinkle it yet, and what if something happens to the Azazel? It gets lost, it dies, it's not around anymore. So you might think, so at that point, that blood is not usable because it's rejected, because you can't sprinkle it when there's no other animal, when the pair is not in existence. So if you would say that is permanently rejected, which is a different opinion, then you'd have to bring 2 more animals and start all over again. But Hanan HaMitzri doesn't say that. He says, hold on to the blood, just keep mixing it. Go get 1 more animal and say, this is the Azazel, and then you pair them together, and then you can continue. So even though that blood was rejected temporarily, it's only temporarily rejected. Once you bring another animal, then it's good again. So we see that that would apply here also. That if this Baraita is the opinion of Hanan HaMitzri, then while the frankincense is on there, it's true, it's rejected, but not permanently rejected, and therefore, if you have wrong intention, even while the frankincense is there, that wrong intention will make it permanently rejected, because there's no way to undo that, because the frankincense is only a temporary rejection, but we know that can be undone, and it will be good again, just like the blood. It's temporarily bad, but it can be good again when you get another animal. Rav Ashi Amar kol shebeyado lahave dachui. Third answer is Rav Ashi says anything that's in your power to fix, that's not called rejected. And since the frankincense is true, right now, if you'd offer it as is with the frankincense on it, it's invalid. But it's not rejected because it's in my power to take it off. That's unlike other types of things. If I take it outside the courtyard, if I have intention to consume it outside the place, that's it. Once I do those things, there's no way I can undo that thought or that action, and it's permanently rejected. But this, the frankincense, I can undo it. So therefore, since I can undo it, it's not a permanent rejection. And so everyone would agree, in fact, even those who disagree with Hanan HaMitzri would agree that if it's something that I can undo within my own power and choice, then it's not called a permanent rejection. Amar Ravada kivated Rav Ashi mistabera. Ravada says Rav Ashi makes the most sense. Teman shmat le'di'it le'dichuyin Rabbi Yehuda. Who says that once something is rejected, it's permanently rejected? I mean, who argues with Hanan HaMitzri? It's Rabbi Yehuda. Ditnan. Ve'od amar Rabbi Yehuda nishpach adam yamut ha'mishtalech met ha'mishtalech yishafech adam. He said regarding the 2 seirim on Yom Kippur that if you have both animals and then the blood fell on the floor, then it's no good. And the goat that was supposed to be sent into Azazel has to die, and you have to start all over again. And the other way around, if the goat that was supposed to be sent to Azazel dies, then the blood you have to get rid of, and you have to start all over again. So you see, Rabbi Yehuda says that these are paired, and once one is rejected, the other one is permanently rejected, and it cannot be fixed. Even if you get 1 more animal, no, you have to go get 2 more animals. And yet, even Rabbi Yehuda agrees. Ve'ilu hechad biyado tanya. Rabbi Yehuda omer kos haya memale midam ta'arobet vezorko v'zirika achat keneged hayesod. Even Rabbi Yehuda, who thinks that once something is rejected, is permanently rejected, if it's in your power to undo it, then Rabbi Yehuda agrees that you can unreject it. And how do we know that? Because on Pesach, when you had many thousands of korbanot that everybody's bringing, now each one, you're supposed to make sure to collect the blood and take the blood and sprinkle it on the Mizbeach. And they had long assembly lines, and they did all this very efficiently. However, it could be that among all the commotion, some blood, a cup of blood dropped and never was sprinkled on the Mizbeach. And therefore that person that has that korban is an invalid korban. So Rabbi Yehuda says, I have an idea. Since all the blood is all over the floor from the whole day, at the end of the day, just it's all mixed up. So take 1 cup of blood and pour it on the Mizbeach, on the base of the Mizbeach. And that way, just in case there was some blood of some korban that didn't get sprinkled on the Mizbeach, now we'll take all this blood, and it has a little bit of all the blood, and we'll sprinkle it, and then that will be a coverall for anyone who maybe missed it. And now how could you do this? When it's on the floor, it's invalid. But you can undo it, because you can take it off the floor as long as it was received in a vessel from the neck of the animal, then even if it falls on the floor, it's only temporarily rejected, but you could get it, pick it up off the floor, and still pour it on the Mizbeach. So you see that Rabbi Yehuda says, even though that animal is rejected because the blood was on the floor, but you can undo it. So anytime you can undo it, we don't say that that's permanently rejected, and therefore we could say that this baraita is even according to Rabbi Yehuda, not only according to Hanan HaMitzri, it could even be Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda agrees that if it's something that's in your power to fix, then it does not become permanently rejected. And therefore, when you have this korban minchat choteh, that it has frankincense on it, it's in your power to take it off. So it's not permanently rejected. And therefore, if you have wrong intention during that time, that wrong intention will make it totally rejected. And even after you take off the frankincense, it still is rejected. Next, Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Natan mashehu shemen al gabe kezait mincha pasal. My ta'ama lo yasim sima koltehu aleha ad deika shi'ura. Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, teaches that how much oil would you have to put in order to violate this prohibition? Even a tiny bit of oil, as long as it's on at least a kezait of flour, then it makes it invalid. Why even a little bit of oil? Because the pasuk says lo yasim. Notice it says lo yasim aleha shemen, lo yiten aleha lebona. Uses different verbs. So we'll say that yiten means it has to be a minimum amount, but yasim, placement means any amount. And it says then aleha. So since it says lo yasim, placing is any amount, so even a tiny bit of oil, aleha on it means it has to be at least a kezait, something significant. So therefore, the minimum to make it pasul would be any amount of oil, but it has to be at least on a kezait of the flour. V'amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef amar Rabbi Yochanan, Natan kezait levona al gabe mashehu mincha pasal. When it comes to the levona, it's the opposite. To make it pasul, there has to be at least a kezait of levona, although that can be placed upon any amount of the flour, even a little bit. My ta'ama lo yiten ketib ad deika netina. It says don't give. So giving is a more substantial verb than placing. So it has to be giving, has to be something that is at least a substantial amount. That's a kezait. And now the word aleha above meant aleha on it. Means a kezait. So you'd think aleha would mean the same thing here. But now we apply the methodology of haveribuy acharibuy ve'enribuy acharibuy ela lema'et. This is an amplification upon an amplification, because you already said aleha before. So when you have a double amplification, it's actually a restriction, and therefore it's saying even if it's a tiny bit. So the law of levona says that has to be a kezait of levona, but it's pasul even if it's upon a little bit of flour. Vikadem amre. There's another version of the law regarding the oil. Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef ba'e Rabbi Yochanan. Here Rabbi Yochanan didn't have an official ruling about oil. He actually had a question about it. Natan mashu shemen al gabe kezait mincha mahu. If someone put a little bit of oil on a kezait of mincha, above we said that yes, he would be liable, but now he's not sure. The question is mi ba'inan sima kenitina ola. When the Torah says lo yasim, does lo yasim mean a kezait also, just like lo yiten? Is it the same? So now he's not sure. Maybe it means you have to have a kezait of oil also, or maybe not. Maybe sima is different, and we leave that question standing. The last section of the Mishnah said Natan shemen al sheyareha. One is only liable if you put the oil on the full mixture of mincha, but once you take out the komets, if you put oil on the rest of it, then that it's not a violation. Tenor banan lo yasim aleha shemen velo yiten yachol bishne kohanim. The pasuk says two different verbs, lo yasim and lo yiten. So I might think that when would both of these apply? If it's two different kohanim, one places oil, then he gets lashes. The other guy places levona, then he gets lashes. So there's only two sets of lashes if it's two different people doing it. But I might think that if it's one kohen that puts oil and also frankincense, maybe that kohen would get only one set of lashes. Talmud omar aleha begufasha mincha katuv medaber velo bekohen. Therefore, the word says aleha on it, meaning that the count of how many prohibitions there are focuses on the mincha offering itself, and it doesn't matter how many kohanim. Even if one kohen did two actions, that one kohen would get two sets of lashes. You might think that putting a vessel of oil inside the vessel of flour, but the oil is not touching, maybe you'd say that is prohibited also, because it says lo yiten, don't put it at all. Vim natan pasal, and if you do put it even inside another vessel, would it make it invalid? The answer is no. Talmud lomad aleha begufa shel mincha katuv medaber. Says on it means on the meal, on the flour itself. That only then, if the oil goes on the flour directly, then it is pasul. But if it's contained within a vessel, inside the other vessel, then it does not become invalid. Baruch Adonai leolam, amen ve'amen.